Welcome to This Explainer. When we picture the presidency, we usually imagine a stoic, solitary leader sitting right behind the resolute desk, making these deeply calculated decisions about the fate of the free world. But history actually tells a very different, much more human story. Behind the closed doors of the White House, it's domestic lives, romances, marriages, and sometimes devastating heartbreaks that have fundamentally shaped the legacies of these leaders. So, that brings us to a really fascinating question. Does a president's private life actually determine their public destiny? Well, looking at the historical record, the answer is a resounding yes. What happens in the private residence of the White House literally has the power to save faltering campaigns, completely destroy carefully crafted public images, and even alter the course of American history. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The Oval Office behind doors. 2. Power couples working together. 3. Tragic losses and enduring grief. 4. Scandals and public betrayals. And 5. The ultimate political barometer. Power couples working together, alliances and advantage. Let's look at two completely different types of power couples. On one side, you have the intellectuals, Herbert and Lou Hoover. They met at Stanford, bonded over geology, and built this relationship based on a really deep intellectual connection. They actually learned Mandarin Chinese so they could have entirely private conversations right in the middle of the White House. Now that is a unified front. But on the other side, we have the incredibly pragmatic political alliance of Franklin and Eleanor Roosevelt. On paper, they were the ultimate power couple. Behind the scenes, though, Eleanor had discovered FDR's love letters to her own personal secretary, Lucy Mercer. And this massive discovery forced them to create a very strategic public front just to ensure his political survival. First ladies have always had very distinct ways of boosting their husband's electability and success. Dolly Madison, for instance, brought incredible charm and energy to James Madison's administration. She pulled off a famously clutch PR move by saving George Washington's portrait right as the British were in the White House. Then you have Sarah Polk. James Polk's administration was strictly business. They had 0 children, and Sarah practically functioned as his personal secretary and top political advisor. And then there's Nellie Taft. William Howard Taft actually wanted to be on the Supreme Court, but it was Nellie who wore the pants behind closed doors. She actively pushed him to run for the presidency and secured his place in the Oval Office. Let's zoom back in on the Roosevelts for a second, because it perfectly shows how domestic crises get managed for public survival. When Eleanor found those letters to Lucy Mercer, she was entirely ready to file for divorce. But the political machine kicked into high gear. FDR's mother threatened to cut them off financially, and his advisors practically screamed that a divorce would be absolute political suicide at the time. So they stayed married. Their own son later described their relationship as an armed truce that endured until the day FDR died. It was a highly calculated sacrifice of personal happiness to maintain that political viability. Tragic losses and enduring grief, heartbreak on the ballot. Now, a candidate's private life can also be weaponized, often with devastating consequences. Take the 1828 campaign of Andrew Jackson. He married Rachel Donaldson, and both of them fully believed her divorce from her previous husband was finalized. Well, it wasn't. Technically, this made Rachel a bigamist. Opponents seized on this immediately and relentlessly dragged her name through the mud during the campaign. The stress of this vicious public smearing took an immense toll, and incredibly, just weeks before Jackson actually took office, Rachel died of a heart attack. Jackson was completely shattered by this, and he blamed his political enemies for the rest of his life. At her funeral, he delivered this chilling quote, "May God Almighty forgive her murderers, I never can." This devastating personal tragedy didn't just cause him unimaginable grief, it permanently shaped his bitter, combative public persona. It totally fueled his endurance throughout his presidency, and his policies and political battles were heavily influenced by this unresolved anger. Tragedy has also forged the identities of leaders we usually think of as invincible. Look at this absolutely brutal timeline for Theodore Roosevelt. On Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1884, Teddy Roosevelt's mother died in their home in the morning. Just hours later, in the afternoon, his wife Alice Lee died in the exact same house. He was entirely shattered by this unimaginable double loss. He eventually fled to the Dakota Territory to try and rebuild himself from the ground up. In his diary on that dark day, he wrote a single crushing sentence: "The light has gone out of my life." This loss was the direct catalyst for Roosevelt heading west. It was out there in the Dakotas that he forged the rugged outdoorsman persona that the American electorate would later overwhelmingly vote for. So you see, his famous public image was born directly from his profound private grief. scandals and public betrayals, the politics of survival. Take a look at this staggering number right here, $20,000. Back in the 1920s, that was an absolute fortune. And it was the exact amount of hush money quietly paid by the Republican National Committee to protect a presidential campaign from a massive campaign-ending scandal. That campaign belonged to Warren G. Harding. Harding was living a double life, carrying on a 15-year affair with Carrie Fulton Phillips, who happened to be the wife of one of his closest friends. We are talking over 1,000 pages of explicit letters so sensitive they were actually sealed at the Library of Congress for 50 years. During his presidential run, Phillips decided to blackmail him. To save the election, the RNC paid her that $20,000 and shipped her off on an all-expenses-paid trip to Japan just to keep her quiet. Even Harding's politically savvy wife, Florence, helped cover the tracks so he could secure the election victory. It is just incredible to compare how presidents across different eras survived these types of crises. We map it out right here. In 1884, Grover Cleveland was exposed for fathering an illegitimate child. His strategy? He told the truth, took responsibility, and actually won the election. Fast forward to 1920 with Warren G. Harding, who we just discussed. He paid hush money, kept it a total secret, and won. Then look at 1998 with Bill Clinton, who had an affair with a 22-year-old White House intern. His strategy of lying under oath resulted in his impeachment by the House. And of course, for Clinton, that strategy led directly to this infamous televised moment, "I did not have sexual relations with that woman." This public denial regarding Monica Lewinsky set off a chain of events that paralyzed the country, leading directly to a historic impeachment by the House of Representatives and an eventual acquittal by the Senate. It really marked an era where the public demanded an unprecedented level of televised accountability. But contrast that modern fallout with the 1880s. This is an amazing historical anecdote. When Grover Cleveland's scandal broke, his opponents ruthlessly chanted, "Mama, where's my paw?" But because Cleveland leaned into it and just told the truth, the mudslinging totally backfired. After he won the election, his supporters gleefully chanted right back, "Gone to the White House, haha!" It's a brilliant example showing that sometimes radical honesty is actually the best political defense. However, jumping to the mid-20th century, the strategy shifted heavily toward maintaining an illusion at absolutely all costs. John F. Kennedy maintained this pristine Camelot image, despite serial infidelities with figures ranging from Marilyn Monroe to White House intern Mimi Alford. By most historical accounts, Jackie Kennedy knew about it, but she actively endured it to safeguard the administration's political image and legacy. Lyndon B. Johnson did the exact same thing, carrying on a decades-long relationship with socialite Alice Marsh while married to Lady Bird. During these eras, it was so often the spouses who quietly absorbed the devastating personal costs just to maintain a flawless public facade for the voters. The ultimate political barometer, morality versus policy. So we've seen how power couples can engineer victories, how tragic losses forge undeniable public strength, and how messy scandals can heavily impact campaigns. All of this proves that the domestic life of the Oval Office is absolutely an engine driving public destiny. So I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought. Looking at how history has played out, from Andrew Jackson's intense grief to Grover Cleveland's honesty and Bill Clinton's impeachment, how do you weigh the scales? In today's highly polarized political climate, does a president's private life, their morality behind closed doors, matter more or less than the policies they enact? It's a huge question and something every voter has to answer for themselves. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this brought some historical clarity to the really complicated lives behind the Oval Office desk.